Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Great River School virtual open house focusing on elementary enrollment. And just as I see folks rolling into the webinar, I'll identify that this is a webinar format open house presentation, which means I will spend some time giving a pre-ordained excuse my vocabulary, giving a preset presentation, and then I'll answer questions. If you have a question you'd like to ask verbally, you can raise your hand and I'll allow you to talk. And then you can also, though, use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen to type in your question. And so it's a little dialog box down at the bottom, and you can type a question in there, and it helps me track what questions I've answered and which I haven't. Okay, it looks like most folks have rolled in to the event. So my name is Sam O'Brien. I am the head of school here at Great River School. And while you are not on campus, we do have a campus in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we are a public Montessori school. And what I'll go through tonight are some basics. And then again, earlier tonight, we hosted an adolescent-focused Q&A and open house presentation. And tonight, we're focusing on the elementary. And so there we go, we're ready. I will share my screen and this presentation just for a bit. And there we go, good. And again, if you have questions, just put them into the Q&A. And if you can't hear me or something is awry technically, please help me out with the chat that is at the bottom of your screen also. So Great River School. We are a public Montessori learning community. We prepare students for their unique roles as responsible and engaged citizens of the world. So we have 3-year age groupings, which means first, second, and third years are all together in lower elementary. Fourth, fifth, and sixth years are all together in upper elementary. And then that follows again for the lower and upper adolescent ages, where 7th, 8th, and 9th graders would count as the lower adolescent program, though what's unique about that is 7th and 8th graders have classes, courses, and advisory together, whereas the 9th grade in the lower adolescent program has all of their advisory in one age group. So all 9th years have an advisory group, and then that allows us to uniquely support the 14 and 15-year-olds in a 9th grade setting in preparing for high school. And then also those 9th years do play a leadership role with the 7th and 8th graders and their younger students in the younger peers in elementary. Our upper adolescent program then is 10th, 11th, and 12th grade all together in an advisory group, and our 11th and 12th graders engage in the International Baccalaureate program. So in the elementary level, the idea of a 3-year age grouping is that students are able to both get to know their community and then also learn from each other as older students know the rules, norms, and expectations of the classroom and are able to role model those for younger students. And then so in the iterations of coming from a first year to a second year to a third year student in a classroom, you learn how to do things from others, then you do them competently as a second year student, and then you teach how to do them to others as a third year student generally. We do take overnight trips called key experiences. We do that at all the age groups. In the lower elementary, when we are back in in-person learning, that's a single night overnight. In the upper elementary, it's a week away. And in the adolescent program, it's 4 to 7 days away on an overnight excursion. Now I say excursion, but specifically it's usually a challenge-focused trip in which everyone's going to do something that is new or novel or challenging to them. And then also everyone deals with and faces adversity together and therefore builds bonds through those experiences. We do have community meetings in the elementary also. First through third grade and fourth through sixth grade classes would gather in their classroom, usually sitting in a circle, would talk about what went well, what could go better, some recognitions or acknowledgements or compliments or thank yous and gratitudes to each other, and then usually a celebration of some kind. And then we talk about growth mindset academics. And specifically when we say growth mindset, it's the idea that intelligence and skills can be developed. So we wouldn't ever declare something like, I'm not good at reading, or I'm not good at math. We know that working at those skills and working at those things can prepare students to do well in learning those skills. A fixed mindset might declare that you either can or cannot do something. A growth mindset would be approaching a challenge with curiosity about what we can learn to do better. So we have a program that emphasizes personal responsibility, work, respect for self and others, and that idea of interdependence, that we're all necessary, we're all required to be part of the group, and we rely on each other for support. That's essential to our school and our work. A community does mean a commitment to shared responsibility, and we would expect that challenge and sometimes uncomfortable situations would give the opportunity for folks to learn. And specifically, community at our school would mean that we are willing to let go of something that we want personally for the good of the whole class or the group. Uh, Community means respecting the contributions of every individual and seeing everyone as necessary to the community. It doesn't mean that everyone's your favorite person or your best friend. It does mean that everyone is dignified and receives dignity, that everyone is respected, and everyone understands how to show up and know each other, and how to show up and respect each other. So the skills we build at Great River School include resilience, understanding, and the ability to work in a group. We build the experiences thinking of a capacity to be able to try new things. And then we are open to experiences that might not be comfortable or practiced by us in the past. We learn personal responsibility through chores, through making our own work plans, and then through the relationships that we have with each other, even in the elementary school. We also learn academic skills. Yes, we are a school, and all of the experiences, the theory, and the emphasis in relationships that I've been talking about for the first 5 minutes of the presentation build the foundation on which students are dignified, respected, understood, and comfortable in their learning community, and therefore able to really engage in deep learning and understanding. We focus first and foremost on the interdependence and development of that respect for others, but we do participate in the teaching and learning of state standards in all the disciplines. And then specifically, we do administer state standardized MCA assessments that all public schools are mandated to carry out. However, we don't set school goals around those test outcomes for students. We do prepare students to accomplish those tasks of those tests, but we prepare students also to think about how and why they're learning. And that personal investment in their learning is what we find carries them as learners into the future. So as a public school that utilizes hands-on Montessori materials for students, those materials, those Montessori trained teachers, and the hands-on curriculum that we offer for elementary students are really a key way that students go from a concrete experience to an abstract understanding. And as we prepare students to go into the adolescent program as junior high schoolers, or the adolescent program as upper adolescents and into the International Baccalaureate program as 11th and 12th years, we build on the experience they've had in the elementary, both forming relationships with each other, really getting deep into their work and sustaining how to accomplish long tasks, and then also thinking about their responsibilities and keeping their own sense of management of their own time and of their own materials. So in terms of transportation, we do have two different approaches to transportation when it comes to ages 12 to 18 or 7th through 12th grade versus grades 1 through 6 or ages 6 to 12. So in the elementary, we offer a limited school busing option, which means if you need the school bus to get to school, we do bus all throughout the city of St. Paul, and we have very limited busing outside the city of St. Paul. Primarily, we prioritize busing for neighborhoods and students for whom, if you didn't have access to a bus, you couldn't come to Great River School. And so what that means is we have satellite stops usually around the city. You can even look at our school busing website right now to see where some of those satellite stops might be. We do revise those year to year. And so after we've enrolled students to join the school, we go in to see who's requesting busing. We then create a bus route and let families know. And then in the elementary program, you as a family would let us know if you require busing or not. Now, again, to emphasize, if you live outside of the city limits of St. Paul, we cannot guarantee a busing, and we would encourage you to not even plan to expect it. We do prioritize busing to the parts of St. Paul that are least served by transit, and or you might be a family who lives in a part of St. Paul where you require busing for your elementary student to come to school, and we would prioritize your family. Secondly, I want to tell you about a typical day at Great River School, and I'll focus on the elementary. So our typical school day before this year was 8:30 a.m. to 3:10 p.m. Right now, we operate from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. However, I do expect us to go back to in-person learning, not only this year for the elementary school, but next fall. It's possible that there could be a slight variation in terms of the school day next year. However, this would be a typical length of a school day, and it would still include a 3-hour morning work period, which means from in this school schedule day from 8:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. an uninterrupted time in which there are some teacher lessons, and there's also a great deal of personal planning and independent work to get really deep into projects that students might be interested in. We then have lunch. We eat lunch in our classrooms in a typical year all together, and the room really gets arranged so that students are set distanced apart and they can spread out their own lunch and really take care of their materials in their classroom. And then they clean up from that lunch. So that's called a beautiful lunch, where they take responsibility to set up their environment, clean it up, and put it away. And then at least 45 minutes of recess every day. So about an hour and a half for lunch and recess. And then when coming in from the afternoon work period, 4 out of the 5 days generally would be coming back to projects that were started in the morning, but without that direct instruction from a teacher, because the teacher circulates to coach the students and engage with them in inquiry in their projects. Once a week for elementary students, you would see either physical expressions or PE teacher, an outdoor education teacher, or a visual arts teacher. And again, that once a week workshop allows for students to have a little bit of enrichment experience that complements their academic learning in class. For adolescent students, we do have athletics, arts, clubs, and after-school activities. In the elementary level, some of the activities available include an archery club, include intramural soccer in the fall, have included broom ball in the winter, have included ultimate frisbee in the springtime, and I have also included things like Lego League, some adolescent students starting clubs and coaching things like debate and some activism clubs. Often our adolescent students are the ones who are either carrying on the tradition of these most common activities that are listed here and or starting new traditions. And so just to summarize our approach is that through growth men's-side academics, through social emotional programming and clear discipline and boundaries and making community agreements, we set up classrooms in the elementary level, especially where the community has made agreements with each other, and by really engaging with each other in discussion and agreement on those things of what does our classroom look like, sound like, and feel like? How do we treat each other? How do we ask for what we need? How do we listen to each other? We build the practices of respect and dignity and investment in relationship that carry into our junior high and senior high programs out of the elementary and really create a unique learning environment where students are really invested in their success and the success of their peers. And so with that, I will pause on the presentation and take the questions that this group has brought tonight. So I see a couple in the Q&A. If you are interested in typing in a few more questions, know that the dialogue at the bottom is a good place to do that. If you are interested in raising your hand and being recognized and having me allow you to speak, we can have an actual dialogue too. So good luck to us as we engage in this virtual open house. All right, so we have a question here. How are students with IEPs integrated into Great River School? So we do serve students with IEPs. Approximately 20% of our student population has either a learning disability or a health diagnosis, which qualifies them for an individualized education plan or an IEP. And for those of you who aren't aware, that's a legally binding document that all schools in the state of Minnesota are required to follow. And so that's not just public schools, but all schools, even independent schools or private schools. As a public school, we serve students with IEPs. We also have an assessment, intervention assessment and qualification process by which we support students with interventions to see if there are lower or least restrictive approaches to accommodating a student's needs in the classroom. And if a student does need an IEP, we do serve them, and we design those IEPs specifically for our environment and for our learning outcomes. So if you already have an IEP when you come to Great River School, you'll have a pre-meeting with a case manager, likely specialist if you work, say, with speech or OT or any other kind of specialized services. And then your special education case manager and any other specialist involved would meet with you and make sure that the IEP that you're bringing in matches the kinds of needs that we experience in our environment too. Generally, then students with IEPs are served directly in the educational environment in their classroom. We do have some special education pull-out times where a student might go work with a special education guide on a specific skill or in a specific area, but especially in the elementary, generally students are served directly integrated in the general education classroom, sometimes supported by an EA, but often really just augmented or supported by the special education teacher and the general education teacher collaborating to serve that student. We have a question here about how many students transfer in from other schools each year? Our son is a fourth grader at a public school. How children might get used to the values and norms of the school if they're joining later in elementary. So that process that I talked about in terms of setting a contract for the classroom is not unique to first grade. It in fact happens every year when students return, both because you might or might not be surprised at how, say, second and third year students or even fifth and sixth year students may have just escaped their memory over the summer of what agreements we had in this classroom. And so even returning students to the same classroom need a reminder and need to reinvest in setting a classroom agreement. So if you're a fourth grader currently and you're applying to enroll in fifth grade, the steps would be you fill out the application for enrollment, you become part of our lottery. We pull out all of the students who applied for enrollment and we set them all in order for every grade. And then if there is an opening in the grade that you're coming to enroll in, we draw all those numbers in order. And then we start at the very top of the list for when there's an opening. And if we have 5 openings, we'll call the first 5 people. If there's 1 opening, we'll just call each person in order until we find someone that says yes. And if you are that student who says yes in 5th grade and you enroll at the school, the way that you're integrated, especially at the beginning of the year, is not different from how any other student is welcomed and adjusts. Specifically, though, if you're coming from a different public school and say it's not the beginning of the year, there is a way in which we reintroduce all students to the norms of the classroom and then also introduce all students to the norms of how it works. And so the only times in which we see students struggle to adjust, frankly, is if their expectation of their experience at school is that it will be all about their individual needs or their individual preferences, and or if a student is really just interested in knowing what they have to do for a grade. So we don't have letter grades in the elementary school, and we rarely even have points of assignments in the elementary school. We have work, and the work that we do finds dignity through engaging in it and then finding meaning in the work based on your personal goals and what you've put in your work journal as a student. So that conference between an adult guide in the classroom, which is what we call teachers, and then the classroom assistant, another adult who is in the room and is highly qualified and part of the learning community, those adults help a student get invested in their work. And so if you're transferring in as a student in 5th grade, say, and you're used to getting a certain number of points a day or scoring points by doing work or only doing work because it has the sort of bottom line effect on how many tallied points you're going to get, that is an adjustment I see some students have to make. But to get used to the values and norms of our school usually is something that happens fairly intuitively and usually is enjoyable for most students. Thank you for bearing with my long answer. I wanted to get all the details in there. What is your school's philosophy around free play and how do you carry it out? Well, specifically, we do talk with students about the work of school being something that's their responsibility, and also the thing that we really love to do is we love to work. We love to get our work done. We love to get interested in our work, whether it's rolling out a 45-foot timeline in the hallway outside your classroom and then putting all the little beads on that timeline to mark the years that pass between the Big Bang and present day, or whether that is working on a large-scale poster project, or that's working with the math materials or the science materials or some of the grammar materials in the classroom. most of the hands-on work that we find students doing often will look like play to the outsider, but the students really take it serious as part of their responsibility and part of their education. So they take that seriously. In terms of free play, though, we have both structured recess to start the year where we all learn norms, we all learn how to welcome people into games, we all learn how to invite people into games, and we all learn how to ask each other to play and listen to each other's responses. But then really students engage in the kind of self-organized play that I think would qualify by most people's standards as free play. And that kind of self-organized work also starts to happen during the day. So if I'm not answering your question around free play, or if there's a definition of it I'm not catching, please ask again. But that question of school's philosophy on free play and how do we carry it out, we do give students unstructured time, and specifically around recess. And then also we ask students to structure their own time, both in the morning work period and especially for afternoon projects. And I think a lot of the same developmental needs that are met during free play often happen throughout the course of the school day also. All right, so Amy and Aaron ask, can you tell us more about the overnight trips students take? Do they always go to the same destinations, or does it vary year to year? So the key experiences, I think, mirror what students might refer to as rites of passages or landmarks on their timeline through Great River School. In the lower elementary, we last spring of 2020, we're going to have our first overnight in May. That has been postponed due to the pandemic. When we do engage in those overnight trips, the lower elementary was set to go to Osprey Wilds on an overnight expedition where students would be away from their families for the first time, usually in first, second, and third grade altogether. But at the end of the year, when they've already formed a really coherent bond as a classroom, and then they arrive, they stay in a dormitory overnight, and they engage in outdoor activities the day they arrive, and then the next morning, and then they come home. In the upper elementary, our students go away to an experiential learning site, usually Monday through Friday. So they leave Monday morning and return back Friday afternoon. In the 7th through 12th grade, the students go to the same place each year, but because the students are aging up, they never really repeat the same trip again. And so we have more details on those specific trips that we give in different presentations. But again, the goal of the trips, and the reason we call them key experiences, is that we really see them as keys that open or unlock a kind of door to vulnerability and shared challenge that allows people to develop deeper relationships with each other. And so investing our time and effort in those key experiences, we find opens the students' ability to both trust each other, to feel comfortable with each other, to refrain from some of the educational interrupting behaviors of intimidation or status seeking or bullying that happen when you don't have a strong investment in community. And because we have such a strong investment in everyone belonging, everyone contributing, and everyone having had a shared experience of challenge where we really did rely on each other, we find that that sets a much better tone for the whole community through the rest of the year. The specialist time. Can you explain a little more, says Philip, about the specialist time? How often do students work with specialists in art or PE? Is it just once per week, or is it more often? Is there a music specialist? Thank you. So Philip, good question. It is once per week per elementary classroom. So the classroom of about 33 students will visit one time a week the specialist. And so in the most recent iteration, for 4 to 6 weeks, one classroom would say go to art. And then that classroom for 4 to 6 weeks would go to the outdoor education specialist. And then for 4 to 6 weeks would go to the PE specialist. Likely when we return to school next fall, we will have a visual arts specialist, an outdoor education specialist, and then some other kind of movement and perhaps drama or singing specialist. The music classes or music experience that an elementary student would have would be a little less formal and more integrated into class. Musical notation is a part of a lot of upper L and some lower L experiences, specifically working with the Montessori material of the tone bars, differentiating between sounds, and then also noting that musical phrasing is something that is part of the Montessori curriculum. Formal instrument lessons or formal vocal instruction is something that starts to open up for upper elementary students through participation in choir. And then in 7th through 12th grade, we do have an instrumental music teacher and a vocal music teacher that engage with our adolescent students. So if you're an elementary family that's really looking for drama, musical instruction during the day, looking for foreign language instruction during the day, or one-on-one technology, we don't have those things. We do have Montessori materials, we have Montessori trained teachers, and we have a Montessori environment. We find that that really sets a foundation of curiosity for students that serves them well in future endeavors, learning any of those skills that I just listed. What % of students stay through graduation? That's an excellent question. And so my pause is that we started our elementary school in 2011, I believe. And that means that our elementary students who entered in 2011, say as first year students, are not yet at graduation, but we have had some students who started in those lower L classrooms, like as third years, graduate just this past year. And so we are just finding our very first graders. Many of them have stayed and will be graduating soon. From an informal survey of elementary families who have enrolled over these past 3 years, over 85% of them do plan that their student will graduate from Great River School. We do have a good deal of practice integrating new students as they enter after first grade. So both in the elementary years, but then also in junior high and senior high, while it is not common for students to leave school, we have expanded those school numbers, and so new students have joined. To get to the root of your question, though, about what % of students stay, I can tell you 85% again of families currently generally plan to stay through graduation. I can say that our student retention rates are very high, so student mobility for the past several years has averaged below 2%, meaning we retain 98% of our students year to year. And as we move forward, I expect that to remain consistent. What proportion of your Montessori materials are open-ended versus the one right answer / self-correcting type that are designed to teach a specific thing and can only be used one way? So generally, the Montessori materials, I suppose I wouldn't necessarily put them into a dichotomy of open-ended or closed in terms of only teaching one thing. Some of the self-correcting, say, math materials that teach algebraic concepts or division or multiplication, or even simple addition or ratios, while they are self-correcting, many of the same materials are used first through 6th and then actually into junior high and high school grades in order to teach both basic concepts, advanced concepts, and then remind students how to integrate new concepts. So those materials, I suppose, are both self-correcting and can be used for further exploration. Generally, in terms of open-ended work, most of the open-endedness part of the Montessori education comes from students both understanding the structures of the materials they're working with and then thinking of ways they want to go deeper, to be creative about the work. Very few of the Montessori materials only teach one thing. However, it is a Montessori practice that as a student enters the classroom, a teacher would orient them to a material one at a time. And then through that orientation and training a student in on how to use the material, the student actually gains a reverence for the materials around them. And then specifically by only engaging in 1 or 2 materials to start with and adding them slowly over time, not only a reverence, but a real anticipation and excitement for working with the material that your teacher hasn't shown you yet or your guide hasn't introduced you to yet. So it is a Montessori standard that you do have a less amount of material before you engage in it. So open exploration is something we do in nature. It's also something we do through our outdoor education program. And in the classroom, the exploration is guided and structured through the guide. So how do students with ADHD or other challenges with executive functioning or time management do with the style of self-directed, self-managed work? Specifically, students who might be experiencing ADHD or have other challenges with executive functioning would Hopefully, generally, we would know that because as we're taking in students, especially students in first year, but all throughout elementary, as a student enters, we do a few assessments around executive functioning, the ability to identify and separate out tasks and challenges in novel settings. And then by understanding that, teachers have an idea of how much usually structure a student needs as they enter in terms of how much guidance a student needs to set a plan for the day and how often they should be checked in with, versus a student who comes in with a higher level of executive functioning might start with a little bit less of a structured plan. So if you're a student who knows that you might have a challenge with open-ended or self-managed work, generally a teacher might have some accommodations such as starting with an outline of what a typical work cycle looks like, and then slowly peeling back the pre-assigned parts of that and having the student add in some control. Might seat the student near the teacher or might assign the student a place to sit, might suggest the order of work for a student. If there are consistent challenges with self-management or self-direction, there might be some further interventions that happen in terms of having another adult check in with that student, or pairing that student with another student in group work and seeing if that helps. Those would be some of the typical ways. If a student really sustains a challenge in executive functioning or time management, I guess I would say we have many, many approaches and skills to use interventions to help teach students those skills and practice those habits. So again, the growth mindset idea that even a student who's experiencing ADHD will gain both dignity and a sense of self-efficacy through managing their own time and learning how to improve that. There are some cases in which if a student has, say, social anxiety disorder or an anxiety disorder that is exacerbated by the self-direction or the responsibility to set a plan for the day, there are some cases in which we do work with students to work on that. And sometimes students work with, say, a social worker or through more formal accommodations to address that kind of need for that student. I hope I answered that question. Again, if there are any of these questions that I don't quite get to all of, please put it back in the chat or please ask for more clarification. So Johanna asks, at what age or grade are students typically assigned homework, and how do homework expectations grow over the years? Well, I'll say generally, homework doesn't happen in the elementary. In upper elementary, so for years 4, 5, and 6, or grades 4, 5, and 6, weekly or bi-weekly homework, meaning every other week. That homework might look like cook a meal for your family, write down the recipe, and then gather reviews by interviewing the family members who ate the meal you made. Or it might be find a community celebration for the harvest or for the solstice or for springtime in your neighborhood and go with your family and document it either through photos or a drawing or an essay. So usually at the upper elementary, kind of weekly math practice for math skills will happen at home in terms of work that's brought home. But the work at home that's part of homework for the upper elementary program, again, is usually focused on a community experience or a challenge that invites you to learn more about your family or your heritage as a student. And so that's what homework looks like in the upper elementary. There isn't homework in the lower elementary. And if students are really inspired about the work they're doing, they might tell you about it or do it at home, but there's no assigned homework in the lower elementary. We have seen both through research and our own research of best practices, but also through our experience with students and our understanding of human tendencies and developmental needs, that homework is not something you have to do at age 6, 7, 8, or 9 to be able to do at age 16, 17, or 18. So formal homework does begin in earnest in 7th and 8th year, typically practicing the kind of executive functioning or planning ahead skills that are necessary for adolescence. But for anyone who has lived through, those of us who are older than 16, just come closer, not too close, a little bit. Those of us who have lived through adolescence might recall that there's a foggy part of being somewhere between age 11 and 16. It usually lasts 3 years or so. And that foggy part is when your brain is parsing out and pruning all of the things you don't need anymore and starting to reconstruct your neural network for your adolescence. And when that happens, we find it's really necessary to practice skills of organization and habits of doing things. And so that's when homework begins at Great River School. But again, we're not looking to burden really students with a lot of work. We're looking to meet their developmental needs and tendencies. And then again, by the time you're in 11th or 12th year, again, I know this is a night focused on elementary, but that's when a student really has the tools then to choose how much time they want to invest in work that can be very challenging and be a couple hours a night in 11th and 12th year, or it can be limited by making very specific choices about what a student will do each night. And so it can be much less. But for the elementary, there's not daily homework, and there is some mathematics skill practice in the upper elementary at home, and a real encouragement to engage with family responsibilities, chores, and life at home. It looks like there will be a change in leadership in the school. Do you have updates on who will be the head of school for the 21-22 year, or how the transition will look? Well, that is true, Chris. Thank you for asking. I, in fact, in the fall of 2019, announced that I would be departing Great River School. And as the pandemic occurred in 2020, in the springtime, I was able to arrange my life plans and come to an agreement at the request of the school board to stay on for another year and really help make sure that we had a direction through this pandemic that, again, I don't think we'll see anything like this again in our lifetimes in terms of how much it's disrupted schools in a way where schools were not prepared in any way to have a plan, the playbook to respond to this. So I'm thankful that I was able to stay and that we were really able to, I think, so far, continue to serve the students and families and staff of the school to the best of our ability as a school. So leadership will be changing. So my final act as head of school, I believe, will be graduation in June of this year, 2021. And then for whomever the interim head of school is next year, I will be available and on call, I believe, to make sure that the legal mandates of the state of Minnesota and being a public school are met, as well as the budgeting and processing that has served the school so well for the past, say, 7 years as I've been head of school, will continue. So I'll continue to be available both to the school board and to the interim head of school for that. But the interim head of school is currently being interviewed for by a group of dedicated staff and students and parents. And those folks will be seeking a head of school who can, I think, hold a stable year down and continue our school's excellent outcomes and social emotional learning foundations for students, while the permanent head of school is then not only sought for, but then interviewed likely next fall by a larger group in person of students, parents, and faculty members, and then ideally interviewed and chosen by the end of the calendar year or very, very early next year in 2022. So again, I will be around in terms of having experience and expertise in the process of the annual calendar. I'll be around to make sure that those things go smoothly, but I'll very much be behind the scenes, making sure the cogs are turning smoothly as another wonderful and talented person, perhaps even someone who's already working at the school, hold the interim role, and the school really allows, hopefully with pandemic restrictions lessened in the fall, allows an in-person interview and search process to continue. So I don't know yet who that will be, but I do know that we'll have the interim person interviewed. I think all candidates will be finalized and interviewed next week. And then that announcement, I believe, will happen before the end of this month in terms of who will be the interim head of school. And so we'll share that out. Does Great River have a prom or something similar that is put on for the high school aged kids? Yes, in fact, the high schoolers themselves designed the prom. Last year's virtual prom was called MORP. I think there was an acronym that put prom backwards into a MORP. It was something about an online recreational program. In any case, there is a prom. There are dances. There's a homecoming. There's student government, student council that gathers of leadership to both put on social functions and activities. It has been a Great River tradition for at least the last 12 years to engage in a Festivus celebration in the middle of the year in December, where students generally have brought in potluck foods and celebrated with each other with karaoke and other silly events. If we could compare some of the similarities and differences between the high school experience at Great River versus a standard public school, I will preview those, and I'll also say we recorded a little bit about more focused on the adolescent program from 7 to 7:45 tonight, and that'll be on our website for you to watch also tomorrow. But a typical high school experience, I would say, is reflected at Great River School, and the wrinkles would be there's about 65 kids per grade in any of the grades 1st through 12th grade, which means a 9th through 12th grade program or a typical high school set of grades, again, has about 260 students. And that's pretty small for a high school. And then on top of that, the 65 or so students in your grade, you really get to know them well, not only through the key experiences, but from the number of classes, community meetings, and events you have with those 65 students throughout the year. And so because students get to know each other so well, I'd say any of the typical high school experiences are really experienced on a much more intimate and personally understood level in terms of very few, if any, of our students keep locks on their lockers. And that's not because they don't have valuables in their lockers, but generally because they have all made agreements that they have come to trust with each other, that the lockers are there to hold their things, and they couldn't imagine someone going into their locker without someone they know knowing also. So it's a very small, tightly knit community. That means that, frankly, probably the typical dating pressures that happen at other high schools don't really happen at Great River School, if only because kids know each other, frankly, almost too well to be interested in dating regularly. So sometimes Great River students go looking elsewhere for that. I know this is an elementary focused night, so I don't mean to go too deeply into that for any families who have not yet acknowledged the likelihood that your adolescent will have a dating experience. But typically, I guess the standard high school experience happens at Great River School, but with, I would say, an increased sense of personal connection to the community, personal necessity to the community. So all of the students that graduate at Great River, for instance, are expected and invited to speak at their graduation. So all 65 of them get up and have the opportunity to say a few minutes of gratitude to each other, which makes for, a long graduation ceremony, but we don't have a valedictorian giving one speech. And I think that might be a reflection that's reflected at the 11th, 10th, 9th, 8th, and 7th grades, where everyone's listened to, everyone's welcome to speak up, and everyone's really needed to make that community work. So that's probably different than a typical school. But all the other stuff that might be a highlight of high school still happens at our school. You teach LGBTQ history and culture. The short answer is yes. What kind of community do you have for LGBTQ families or students? Well, I can say that there is both a gender creative and non-binary family group for either parents and or students who are gender non-binary. We have a student wellness and equity coordinator position that encourages and supports both events for students and curriculum and programming for students that focuses on identity and positive identity for historically marginalized identities, whether that has to do with gendered identity, sex and sexuality, race, learning disability, and any identity that might have been historically marginalized. We do have an active set of vocabulary lessons and programs that are presented at age appropriate levels, both for 1st to 3rd grade, 4th through 6th grade, and up through adolescence. And then we engage in making sure that the fiction, we study the nonfiction, and the history that we study includes the stories of individuals and identities who, again, may have been historically marginalized by typical state standards or academic standards. What's your literacy curriculum? Specifically, do we use phonics-based reading? Well, if you want to get really into it, we use Fontes and Pennell as a supportive curriculum structure for reading interventions. Our literacy curriculum in the Montessori setting has to do with, again, hands-on materials. And so at the very earliest stages, we do have some interventions for the very earliest readers developing their skills that might use some of the Montessori Children's House materials. But then we also have students really engaging in writing and expressing their ideas through writing in order to gain more reading skills also, and in storytelling with each other. And again, that Fontes and Pinnell formal curriculum is what we use both for intervention and support of the development of literacy for students who aren't reading when they enter, if that's the case. Many of our first year students enter with at least some literacy skills, if not reading to themselves. And some students enter first grade not yet reading. And so we do plan and accommodate all of those students. So if we only have a 2% transfer rate, how are new students able to come into the school? Are you growing the school over time? That is a wonderful question, Laureen. Thank you for asking. So over the past 3 years, we have greatly expanded the number of students at Great River School, which has allowed many more new students to come. With that low mobility rate of students, it is true that it's rare for, say, a 5th or 6th grade spot to open, or even a 2nd or 3rd grade spot. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means it's more rare. We're taking 63, I believe, brand new first graders in next year. I think there will be openings in just a couple openings in 5th grade and 7th grade. And then I also know that between 8th and 9th grade, that's one of the most likely times for students to decide that they do want a typical or bigger school experience, or maybe there's something in high school they want. Like we don't have a pool, we don't have an orchestra of our very own, though we do have students who participate in orchestras. We just don't have enough students to populate a typical orchestra or marching band or something like that. So we have students, if they want that kind of big experience, leave in 8th grade for another school in 9th grade. Though a good number of them reapply to come back in high school and are on wait lists. Those students who do leave create openings in 9th grade. So I know there'll be openings in 1st grade. I know there'll be openings in 9th grade. And then typically over the last several years, we have been adding to our high school population. And so moving from classes that 4 years ago were about 50 students per grade to these larger 65 student grade level classes has meant that a lot of really great opportunities and new students have come to our school and has really, really done well, I think, for our community. And so it's rare with a low mobility rate to have openings at all the grades. However, I said this earlier tonight, I'll say it again, 100% of the students that have enrolled at Great River School have filled out the application. And no students have been able to enroll if they didn't fill out the application. So if you're interested in coming, even though it might feel like a lottery long shot, please fill out the application for enrollment. It's the required first step to being even offered a spot. And then we have some students who choose to do PSEO, and that opens up spots in our classrooms. We have some students who choose to do travel with their families, or their families might have a need to take a leave of absence. And those are things that also open spots at the school. So while it is low, the student mobility rate, we still do have openings. And so we do want you to apply if you're interested in enrolling. All right, and then just a couple more questions here. I was looking at the state website that lists school facts at racial demographics for the elementary at Great River. I'm so glad you asked this question, Jessica. And so what I want to do is share the screen for just a few more slides. I know we started just a couple minutes late, so those of you who have to log off because we're at time, feel free to do so. We're going to keep recording. And hopefully what you all can see is the slides that we started with. And what I'm going to go through is just the rest of the slideshow that answers a couple of these questions. But the question here is, it's listed in your elementary as about 75% white identifying. I'm wondering if that average is consistent across the levels, or if the school has been able to gradually increase students of color enrolled at the other grades. And so I'm just going to specifically go through a few of these outcomes to get to a slide that speaks to that. And specifically the next question about diversity that Courtney asks, I want to answer both those questions right now. And so these are some of the academic outcomes for students, specifically showing that Great River on the far left side shows more high growth and medium growth than typical schools in this area of reading. And then even in mathematics, where we're again shown here in yellow, we're comparing ourselves here to St. Paul Public Schools and then the state as a whole. And again, what we're seeing here is Great River School on the far left side shows a good deal of high growth, especially in mathematics compared to other school districts. And what we see there is, I think, the impactful evidence of Great River School's efficacy in terms of encouraging um, a sense of growth mindset among our students in their studies. And so here is where we say, why so many white kids at your school, especially in a city where St. Paul Public Schools ethnicity is only about 1 in 5 students are white, where at Great River School, about 3 out of 4 students are white. Why is that happening? Specifically, I just want to speak to the challenges that our society has. And we are not a bubble somehow apart from the rest of society. We're not offering a school that solves all of society's problems yet. And in particular, we are subject to the very same housing and neighborhood challenges in terms of racial segregation that affect the Twin Cities. We are subject to, I think, some of the very same school patterns that show the tendency for charter schools especially to develop racially homogenous and or ethnically homogenous populations. So specifically, we are not seeking to serve mostly white students. We don't believe Montessori schools primarily are serving the interest of white students. And what we do seek is to build relationships of trust with the communities around us. So the North End, the Frogtown, the Hamlin Midway neighborhoods especially, and especially applicants from those neighborhoods who may be traditionally underserved or under-recognized by a typical public school system. And so at our school, we do talk overtly and specifically about racism, about the effects of white supremacy and white supremacy culture on both the educational system and then North America and our history over the last 500 and more years as a whole. And then we also talk about institutional oppression and how the discussion of analyzing institutional oppression, racism, and white supremacy is part of the curriculum so that a white identifying student has the vocabulary and the experience to recognize a system by which they may inadvertently be gaining an advantage or a privilege. We would like all of our students to be comfortable talking about that. And then in particular at our school, we invest in both the wellness and equity programming, and then also affinity group programming and groups for students to meet with each other if they're Black, Indigenous, or students of color, to build a sense of community and camaraderie around what are the unique challenges of being at a school that is mostly white. And so we're doing that to address the pragmatic challenge of right now. What we would like, I believe, as a Montessori school is to be a school that reflects the demographics of the neighborhoods around us. As a charter school, we have a lottery system that the state of Minnesota has legislatively mandated, only takes student names, and we can show no preference for student enrollment other than whether or not the student has a sibling at the school. Somewhat ironically, the ability to have siblings at the school has actually increased our non-white student population, especially over the last several years, as we have, especially at the grades where new students have entered in first grade and in ninth grade and 10th grade over the past couple of years, been able to enroll more students of color than in typical years prior. But it's not a challenge unique to us, but uniquely we are addressing the challenge, I think, by talking about it openly. And so when we do talk about race, racism, and institutional oppression, we want to continue to work both in the interest of students and preparing them for their role in the world, to understand that educational equity is what we're seeking. And so we want the outcomes. We want what I would call the opportunity debt, not the achievement gap, but you'll hear a lot reported in Minnesota about the achievement gap, and support for students that doesn't imply the student needs additional support, but in fact may be in a majority white school that we have to actively recognize the supports that a student of color might engage with and need, especially in their adolescence. And so specifically, we do serve students who are Black, Indigenous, or student of color quite well. And specifically, when we look at the academic outcomes for students, we see that reflected in terms of comparing the outcomes of students in different demographic groups in reading performance here. Again, Great River School in yellow bars compared to the state as a whole or St. Paul Public Schools. And again, here, students on track for success in math. Again, here shown in demographics, students, especially students who I think really benefit from a sense of confidence in their performance and their ability to overcome historical challenges as an individual student. Students really benefit in areas like math from our learning model of going from hands-on concrete learning to abstract learning. And again, a part of the presentation that's usually mostly for high school students, but is highlighting our decades-long, our whole entire history, not only programs for students of color, but really strong LGBTQ plus visibility and support. So a GSA program where you see pictures of adolescent students here having engaged in planning and work together, but we also have school-wide celebrations that include ages 6 to 12 in the elementary. We do serve students for special education. We have English language learners enroll at our school. We do ask of families to be part of a solution. If you see a challenge at the school, we want you to also have your students take responsibility at home for work and for chores. We want to hold students to high expectations. And then we provide parent education around Montessori. We also really require of you, just like we require of our students, to be part of the community. So when you enroll at Great River School, you're not just signing up to receive a service. We're not a service-based organization. We're really signing up to take responsibility to keep this place uniquely supportive, I think uniquely engaged, and dedicated to Montessori outcomes of preparing students for their role as peacemakers in the world. And so I've answered your questions that have been entered, and I just want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. If there's something we didn't answer that you'd like to ask, please email us at enroll@greatriverschool.org. That's ENROLL@greatriverschool.org. And it's really been an honor. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to get the chance to meet you all soon. Oh, there's just maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I'll answer those before we go. We've stayed this long. Why not answer the last one? We are able to share a recording of this session. Yes. So this session, as recorded, will be sent out to everybody who is on the lottery list. And so make sure that you are signed up for that. And if you are curious about how to do that, just again, go to our website and click at the top in About and Enroll, or Contact Us and Enroll. And you'll be able to just simply enter your student's name, enter your contact information, and we'll keep your email address on file and include you in all of our informs, which includes these sessions that are recorded. Okay, so thank you so much. Have a beautiful, wonderful evening. Hopefully everyone's in bed and asleep, and you can be there soon too. Thank you. Take care, everybody.